Swami Vivekananda on himself. Chapter 1, Birth and Boyhood. For the salvation of his own soul and for the good and happiness of the many, the sannyasin is born in the world. To sacrifice his life for others, to alleviate the misery of millions, rendering the air with their cries, to wipe away the tears from the eyes of the widow, to console the heart of the bereaved mother, to provide the ignorant and depressed masses with the ways and means for the struggle for existence and enable them to stand on their own feet, to preach, broadcast the teachings of the Shastras to one and all without distinction for their material and spiritual welfare, to rouse the sleeping lion of Brahman in the hearts of all beings by the diffusion of the light of knowledge. For this, the sannyasin is born in the world. It is for the consummation of this purpose in life that we have taken birth and we shall lay down our lives for it. My father and mother fasted and prayed for years and years so that I would be born. I know that before I was born, my mother would fast and pray and do hundreds of things which I could not even do for 5 minutes. She did that for 2 years. I believe that whatever religious culture I have, I owe to that. It was consciously that my mother brought me into the world to be what I am. Whatever good impulse I have was given to me by my mother. And consciously, not unconsciously. The love which my mother gave to me has made me what I am, and I owe it to her that I can never repay. How many times I have seen my mother going to take her first meal when it was 2 o'clock. We took ours at 10 and she at 2 because she had so many things to attend to. For example, someone knocks at the door and says, "Guest," and there is no food except what was for my mother. She would give that to him willingly and then wait for her own. That was her life, and she liked it. And that is why we worship mothers as gods. I have such a memory. When I was only 2 years old, I used to play with my size at being a Vairagi, clothed in ashes and kaupina. And if a sadhu came to beg, they would lock me in upstairs to prevent my giving too much away. I felt that I also was this, and that for some mischief I had to be sent away from Shiva. No doubt my family increased this feeling, for when I was naughty, they would say, "Dear, dear, so many austerities, yet Shiva sent us this demon after all instead of a good soul." Or when I was very rebellious, they would empty a can of water over me, saying, "Shiva Shiva," and then I was alright, always. Even now, when I feel mischievous, that word keeps me straight. When I was a little boy at school, I had a fight with another schoolfellow about some sweetmeats, and he, being the stronger boy, snatched them from my hand. I remember the feeling I had. I thought that boy was the most wicked boy ever born, and that as soon as I grew strong enough, I would punish him. There was no punishment sufficient for his wickedness. We have both grown up now, and we are fast friends. This world is full of babies to whom eating and drinking and all these little cakes are everything. They will dream of these cakes, and their idea of future life is where these cakes will be plentiful. What I saw and felt when going through the forest on the way to Raipur has forever remained firmly imprinted in my memory, particularly a certain event of one day. We had to travel by the foot of the Vindhya mountains that day. The peaks of the ranges on both sides of the road rose very high in the sky. Various kinds of trees and creepers, bending under the weight of the fruits and flowers, produced wonderful beauty on the mountain sides. Birds of various colors flying from tree to tree filled the quarters with sweet notes. I saw all these and felt an extraordinary peace in my mind. The slow moving bullock carts arrived at a place where two mountain peaks, coming forward as though in love, locked themselves in an embrace over the narrow forest path. Observing carefully between the meeting points, I saw that there was a very big cleft from the crest to the foot of the mountain on one side of the path, and filling that cleft, there was hanging in it an enormous honeycomb, the result of bees' labor for ages. Filled with wonder, I was pondering over the beginning and the end of that kingdom of bees. My mind became so much absorbed in the thought of the infinite power of God, the controller of the three worlds, that I completely lost my consciousness of the external world for some time. I do not remember how long I was lying in the bullock cart in that condition. When I regained normal consciousness, I found that we had crossed that place and come far away. As I was alone in the cart, no one could know anything about it. We cannot deny that there is much misery in the world. To go out and help others is therefore the best thing we can do. Although, in the long run, we shall find that helping others is only helping ourselves. As a boy, I had some white mice. They were kept in a little box in which there were little wheels, and when the mice tried to cross the wheels turned and turned, and the mice never got anywhere. So it is with the world and our helping it. The only help is that we get moral exercise. When my teacher came to our house, I brought my English and Bengali books to him, and showing him the particular books and the portions in them that were to be learnt as lesson for the day, I laid myself down and sat quietly. The teacher repeated twice or thrice the spelling, pronunciation, meaning, etc. of the words of these portions of those books as if he was himself learning the lesson, and went away. That was sufficient for me to learn them. A little arithmetic, some Sanskrit grammar, a little of language and accounts. These are taught in the primary school. A little book on ethics, taught by an old man, we learned by heart, and I remember one of the lessons. For the good of a village, a man ought to give up his family. For the good of a country, he ought to give up his village. And for the good of humanity, he may give up his country. For the good of the world, everything. Such verses are there in the books. We get them by heart, and they are explained by teacher and pupil. This was the first verse that I was taught in my life the first day I went to school. He indeed is a learned man who looks upon all women as his mother, who looks upon every man's property as so much dust, and looks upon every being as his own soul. Even while I was a student at Calcutta, I was of a religious temperament. I was critical even at that time of my life. Mere words would never satisfy me. I used to see all my life a wonderful point of light between my eyebrows as soon as I shut my eyes in order to go to sleep, and I used to observe attentively its various changes. So that it might be convenient to see it, I used to lie on my bed in the way people bow down, touching the ground with their foreheads. The extraordinary point kept changing its colors and increasing in size, became gradually converted into the form of a ball, and bursting at last covered my body from head to foot with white liquid light. As soon as that happened, I lost consciousness and fell asleep. I believed that all people went to sleep that way. I was long under that impression. When I grew up and began to practice meditation, That point of light used to come before me as soon as I closed my eyes, and then I concentrated my mind on it. In those days, I daily practiced meditation with a few friends according to the instructions of Maharshi Devendranath. We talked among ourselves about the nature of visions and experiences that each of us had. At that time, I came to know from what they said that they never had the vision of such a light and that none of them went to sleep in that way. From my boyhood, I have been a daredevil. Otherwise, could I have attempted to make a tour round the world almost without a penny in my pocket? While at school, one night I was meditating within closed doors and had a fairly deep concentration of mind. How long I meditated in that way, I cannot say. It was over, and I still kept my seat when, from the southern wall of that room, a luminous figure stepped out and stood in front of me. There was a wonderful radiance on its visage, yet there seemed to be no play of emotion on it. It was the figure of a sannyasin, absolutely calm, shaven headed, and staff and kamandalu in hand. He gazed at me for some time and seemed as if he would address me. I too gazed at him in speechless wonder. Then a kind of fright seized me. I opened the door and hurried out of the room. Then it struck me that it was foolish of me to run away like that perhaps he might say something to me. But I have never met that figure since. Many a time and often I have thought that if again I saw him, I would no more be afraid but would speak to him. But I met him no more. I could find no clue to its solution. I now think it was the Lord Buddha whom I saw. From my very boyhood, whenever I came in contact with a particular object, man, or place, it would sometimes appear to me as if I had been acquainted with it beforehand. But all my efforts to recollect the particulars were unsuccessful, and yet the impression persisted. I will give you an instance. One day, I was discussing various topics with my friends at a particular place. Suddenly, something was said, which at once reminded me that in some time past, in this very house, I had talked with these friends on that very subject, and that the discussion had even taken the same turn. Later on, I thought that it might be due to the law of transmigration, but soon I decided that such definitive conclusions on the subject were not reasonable. Now, I believe that before I was born, I must have had visions somehow of those subjects and people with whom I would have to come in contact in my present birth. Such memories have come every now and then throughout my life. Just 2 or 3 days before the entrance examination, I found that I hardly knew anything of geometry. So I began to study the subject, keeping awake the whole night. And in 24 hours, I mastered the 4 books of geometry. I studied hard for 12 years and became a graduate of Calcutta University. It so happened that I could understand an author without reading his book line by line. I could get the meaning by just reading the first and the last line of the paragraph. As this power developed, I found it unnecessary to read even the paragraphs. I could follow by reading only the first and the last lines of a page. Further, where the author introduced discussions to explain a matter, and it took him 4 or 5 or even more pages to clear the subject, I could grasp the whole trend of his arguments by only reading the first few lines. As soon as I went to bed, two ideals appeared before me every night, ever since I had reached my youth. One vision presented me of a person of endless wealth and prosperity, innumerable servants and dependents, high rank and dignity, great pomp and power. I thought that I was seated at the head of those who were called big men in the world. I felt I certainly had the power to achieve this end. Again, the next moment, I felt as if I had given up everything of the world and was leading a life of renunciation, putting on a loin cloth, eating whatever was available without effort, spending nights under trees, and depending solely on God's will. I felt I could live the life of the rishis and the munis if I wanted. These two opposite pictures, according to which I could mould my life, thus arose in my mind. But the latter would grip the mind in the end. I thought that it was in this way alone that man could attain bliss, and that I should follow this path and not the other. Brooding on the happiness of such a life, my mind would then merge in the contemplation of God, and I would fall asleep. It is a matter of astonishment that this happened every night for a long time. I never terrified children by speaking of hobgoblins, as I was afraid of uttering a falsehood, and scolded all whom I saw doing it. As the result of English education and my frequenting the Brahma Samaj, the devotion to verbal expression of truth increased so much then. At the beginning of this century, it was almost feared that religion was at the end. Under the tremendous sledgehammer blows of scientific research, old superstitions were crumbling away like masses of porcelain. Those to whom religion meant only a bundle of creeds and meaningless ceremonials were in despair. They were at their wits' end. Everything was slipping between the fingers. For a time, it seemed inevitable that the surge tide of agnosticism and materialism would sweep all before it. When I was a boy, this skepticism reached me, and it seemed for a time as if I must give up all hope of religion. But fortunately for me, I studied the Christian religion, the Mohammedan, the Buddhistic, and others, and what was my surprise to find that the same foundation principles taught by my religion were also taught by all religions. It appealed to me this way. What is the truth? I asked. When I was a boy here in this city of Calcutta, I used to go from place to place in search of religion. And everywhere I asked the lecturer, after hearing very big lectures, "Have you seen God?" The man was taken aback at the idea of seeing God, and the only man who told me I have was Ramakrishna Paramhamsa. And not only so, but he said, "I will put you in the way of seeing him too."